Imagine arriving at a settlement where more than 100 people were supposed to be living, but when you finally return, every single person is gone. No battle, no obvious destruction, no bodies, just an abandoned settlement, and one strange word carved into wood: Croatoan. This is the mystery of Roanoke. In the late 1500s, English settlers established a colony on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The colony struggled from the beginning. Food was limited, relations with nearby indigenous communities were complicated, and supplies from England were desperately needed. Eventually, the colony's governor, John White, returned to England to get help. But then something went terribly wrong. England became involved in war with Spain. Ships were delayed, and White couldn't immediately return. Years passed. Then, in 1590, he finally made it back to Roanoke. What he found shocked him. The settlement was empty, not temporarily abandoned. Empty. The homes were gone. The colonists were nowhere to be seen, and there was no clear sign of what had happened. But White noticed something that made the mystery even stranger. A word had been carved into a tree: Croatoan. Could it have been a message, a warning, or a clue to where the colonists had gone? White believed the word might identify their destination, but before he could investigate properly, bad weather forced him to leave, and the mystery remained. More than 4 centuries later, we still don't have a single explanation accepted by everyone. But the clues get even stranger. The word Croatoan was not random. It was associated with an indigenous community and an island south of Roanoke. That created an obvious possibility. Maybe the colonists had moved. Perhaps they abandoned Roanoke because the settlement could no longer support them. They may have joined nearby indigenous communities, moved farther inland, or split into smaller groups. But there was an important clue. Before leaving England, John White had reportedly arranged a system for the colonists to leave messages. If they were forced to leave because of danger, they were supposed to carve a cross. When White returned, no such cross was found. Instead, there was the word Croatoan that seemed to support the possibility that the colonists had left voluntarily. But voluntarily did not mean safely. The settlers had limited supplies, little support, and were separated from England by an enormous ocean. Moving could have been their only realistic option. Yet one question remained. If they relocated, why did later explorers fail to find a clear settlement containing the missing colonists? That's where the theories begin. Over the centuries, historians and researchers have proposed several possibilities. One theory says the colonists moved to nearby areas and gradually became part of indigenous communities. Another possibility is that they moved farther inland. Some researchers have searched for archaeological evidence that could connect European objects with indigenous settlements. There have even been theories that some colonists traveled toward the Chesapeake region, but evidence has never produced a simple answer. And that's what makes Roanoke so fascinating. The mystery isn't necessarily that more than 100 people magically disappeared. The more realistic possibility is much more complicated. The colonists may have survived for some time, but eventually scattered, integrated into other communities, or died from the harsh conditions of their new environment. The problem is proving exactly which events happened. There are no surviving first-hand accounts explaining their final years. No definitive record tells us where every colonist went. And no single archaeological discovery has solved the entire mystery. Even the famous word Croatoan doesn't necessarily tell us everything. It could have pointed toward a destination. It could have referred to a community. Or it could have been only one part of a much larger story. But then comes the most intriguing possibility. What if the colonists didn't simply disappear? What if traces of them are still hidden in the landscape? Today, archaeologists continue studying the region around Roanoke and the surrounding settlements. Researchers have discovered evidence showing that European and indigenous communities interacted in the region, but proving the fate of every Roanoke colonist is a completely different challenge. The colony existed more than 400 years ago. Wooden buildings disappeared, landscapes changed, communities moved, and evidence can be destroyed or buried over centuries. That's why Roanoke remains one of America's most famous historical mysteries. Not because we know nothing, but because we know just enough to ask more questions. A group of English settlers arrived. They attempted to establish a permanent colony. Their governor left for England. When he finally returned, the settlement was empty, and all that remained was a single mysterious word: Croatoan. Maybe the colonists found a way to survive. Maybe they joined other communities. Maybe they scattered across the region. Or maybe the final answer is still waiting somewhere beneath the ground. And that's the unsettling part. The mystery of Roanoke may not have disappeared. It may simply be incomplete. Because sometimes history doesn't leave us a final chapter. It leaves us a clue, and waits hundreds of years for someone to understand it. What do you think happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? And if you want more mysteries that history still can't completely explain, subscribe to Mystery Vault.